Hello, and welcome to Freelance Frontiers, a weekly conversation navigating the future of flexible work. I am Ray Hames. I'm an agency expat, a brand side leader, and former freelancer myself. And I'm here with Nick Hammond. What's up,
How's
Nick?
it going?
Who is a career freelance creative turned coach. We are here to chat about both sides of the freelance relationship. And we hope that our listeners will find something in here that helps them smooth out the bumps along the road working with and as freelance talent themselves.
It's funny. I feel like your intros have become so much more like calm and fluid now. Like at the beginning, we were both ripping right through it. And now it's like done this for a little bit.
Yeah. Making it consistent.
Yep. If you have any feedback, insights, questions, or would like to join us on a future episode, drop us a DM. So today we're going to be talking about the lynchpin of successful flexible teams, and that is project management. It's one of the most critical pieces of the freelance team puzzle, and a good PM not only acts as a right hand to their director or C-level boss, but they're the day-to-day glue that keeps projects focused, on budget, and on time. So let's start from the top. Ray, what does a good project manager actually do?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts here on this one. It's such an interesting topic for us to chat about. I've worked with loads of project managers in all sorts of capacities. I've hired and managed, I don't know, 5 or 10. And I've been a PM myself in both an agency setting as a freelance PM and running brand side projects. So I've really felt this role personally. At the most basic level, to answer your question, a PM's job is to own the logistics of any given project so that everybody involved has what they need to execute. This could be in terms of information, it could be access to tools, it could be materials, and obviously maintaining guardrails like budgets and timelines. And like you said, PMs are generally hired to be kind of the ops wizard that supports a more strategic leader, somebody like a head of product or a creative director. So that person can focus on the big picture needs and the PM can focus on the details. Like everybody kind of needs that balance to have a successful project. And I think that, good project managers really are that operations wizard. They live for checklists. But the thing that separates good from great, in my experience, is really somebody that can bring empathy and communication skills to the table. Because this person is almost always like a true middle manager. They have to be a conduit between that senior leader and the broader project team. And I think that obviously you've got to have a lot of sensitivity and contextual awareness to get the best work out of people while filtering kind of the day-to-day whims of those more senior people. I know that that's a big, heavy lift of the role day to day. I'm curious to know, in your experience as a freelancer, what's been your experience working with PMs and what separates good from great in that relationship?
Yeah, I like the term wizard there because I feel like it encompasses kind of my answer to this question. But to be honest, I've worked in more situations where freelancers and internal employees have had to kind of internalize that PM role within their own skill set as opposed to really having a dedicated one. But that being said, the ones that I've been able to work with were absolutely worth their weight in gold. It's kind of like, if you're not getting a good brief, they can go back to the source and help get better info. If you're not sure where some sort of file exists, they can help track it down. If you need to bring in a different stakeholder to kind of clarify some other piece of information that you really need to make a choice, they can get in and do that. And that's where I really think what your point was, that's where the wizardry comes involved. Is they're really in the cracks, kind of helping to fill in the gaps with what's going on between all these other roles. But to summarize, in my opinion, what separated good from great was just someone that can handle getting you the clarity that you need to do your actual job, regardless of what that means. And
Yes.
to follow that up, I think your answer was great, which is the way that they do that is through empathy, because you can't get to that information without really understanding how to work with people.
Yeah, it's never like a one size fits all thing. I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day that was talking about coming from a copywriting perspective and how, this woman's a freelance copywriter and that every role that she's found herself in over the past year or so has really been companies that are looking to bring her on as a copywriter. Hey, we need you to write blog posts. We need you to write social copy. We need you to write a white paper. but we also need you to plan the calendar around these pieces of content. We also need you to write a content strategy brief for yourself. And we need you to be managing a team. We need you to be managing, an SEO expert to support this effort. And ultimately, that's a copywriter plus PM. And I think it's obvious when there's economic pressure involved, right? Like everybody is trying to do more with less. But I really think that it's not that arrangement is not in the best service of any project. Like, you're not going to get the best focus from your copywriter in that setup, because they're spending half of their time doing something that's like genuinely out of their wheelhouse. And you're also not going to get an efficient project management supplement from a person who's not a project manager.
Yep.
And I think that companies that are looking to bring on people that and put them in that situation, I'm sure it comes from economic pressure. Again, like, hey, we don't have anybody to manage these logistics, so you got to manage them yourself. Yep. But looking at that as a long-term structure, I don't think is very fair to the talent that you want to be working with, because the best, especially when you're focused on building freelance teams, the big opportunity that you have with bringing freelancers on is tapping into specialists. So let them specialize. And I think that I think probably this is something that we'll chat about in just a couple of seconds, but like how critical a PM can be to enabling that type of flexibility and optionality across building a flexible team long term. So yeah, that experience that you're saying, being brought into a role, being asked to be a PM yourself, even if that's not, you're probably great at it, but not necessarily what you want to be paid for. I think that that's something that companies can really deep think on about how they structure these flex teams in the future.
I think it's interesting too, because what was so cool to me about this topic was that it touches on so many of the other episodes that we've done around like SOPs and like, at least from a freelance perspective, how you stand out as a freelancer is like being able to absorb some of this skill set, even if you're not necessarily best in class at it. It helps you to understand how to, like, if I have some level of a PM skill set, I can help to understand more of how that's going to work when I work with one of those roles in a different kind of, contract or another setup.
Definitely. I'm curious, so in talking about just kind of like trend lines and really experience 5 years ago is like whatever now. But let's say across the last 18 months from your experience, across your clients, what have the client side teams looked like in terms of roles? I'm curious to know if our experience on at least marketing teams looks the same.
Yeah. So from what I've seen is the pattern has been that more of the true PM roles only seem to exist in kind of larger organizations. And a lot of those roles kind of began being eliminated upwards of 5 years ago. So I had kind of with one of my older roles that I was in, I had kind of come in on the tail end of what seemed to be exactly what you were talking about of economic pressures, where I came in and there was a PM who was absolutely crushing their job. And within a few months of the company facing some headwinds, that was one of the first roles that was eliminated. And being that at the time I was more of a junior, it was kind of a shock to me because I didn't quite understand how all of the org structure worked in the first place. So it was kind of like a baptism by fire of okay, I need to go track this crap down myself and figure out how do I actually get myself what I need to then do my job after the fact. And little did I know that is what that job had been doing up until that point. But I think the expectation was that regardless of the role, from design to marketing to product, whatever, that PM processes were kind of absorbed into the tasks that you were expected to handle yourself. And specifically to answer your question, within the last 18 months, I can honestly say that I have not worked with a single PM specific role in a very long time.
Oof. It's chaos.
Yeah. Yep. So if you were going to build a new department today, kind of on your end of things, say for engineering or marketing, how would you prioritize new hires?
Funny you ask, because that's part of my plan for the new year. I think, and again, I guess I'm biased because I've lived in this freelance space for so long, and I see so much value to the freelance, within the freelance workforce, that I'm like, if I'm literally any company, I'm trying to figure out, how do I build a system for myself to take advantage of that?
Mm-hmm.
I would build a department with a single department lead, whether you're a CMO or a chief of product or a head of engineering, and a really capable PM or an ops
Mm-hmm.
manager that would be that would be responsible for managing the day-to-day, kind of whether it's schedule building, whether it's team allocations, whether it's, project updates, whether it's budget management. And they would be my right hand, if I'm this department lead, they would be my right hand in executing my plans with a freelance first team. So depending on the plans, depending on the initiative, depending on the budget, you prioritize your third full-time hire based on your needs. But the PM role, I think, is one that's so critical to have embedded as a full-time role. Not only because they need to be that like real partner to the department leader. They need to know what's going on. They need to have deep contextual awareness of why projects are happening and what's needed to succeed. But also they need systems access. Mm-hmm. And I know that everybody's eyes, I know that that's boring, but you can't, I've been a freelance project manager, and it's really tricky because you're always dependent on somebody on the inside to get you VPN access, to get you restricted files, to get you synced up. You can only, if you're not an employee, you can't have really helpful, meaningful conversations with finance or legal or HR. And what that does is it kicks that responsibility back up to your department head. And mm-hmm. that's how that kind of like doom loop happens, is because at critical moments, that department leader is still responsible for a lot of the logistics, right? And because they're not doing it day to day like the PM is, it takes them longer to get into that headspace to say, oh, you need my help with a contract. Right. Let me turn off my creative brain and think about that. And everything slows down. In the best case scenario, a PM is like, okay, who are the people that we need on this team? I've got access to contract templates. I've got access to finance. I just need you to sign off on the total cost, right? And here's what we planned, and here's what it is. Bing, bang, boom. Like, that is the best productive relationship, like an internal relationship between a department leader and a PM. And then from there, like I said, it gives you a lot of optionality to bring in specialist skills, whether it's on a long-term contract, whether it's on part-time gigs, like whatever. But it takes the onus off of those freelancers to self-manage a lot of the logistics that, again, you're paying these people by the hour. You may be paying that, but like, you're paying by the hour. Do you want to pay them by the hour for tasks that they're not specialists in and they don't want to do and isn't going to add to the project's value? Or do you want to pay for their time to think about your business in the context that you hired them to do it? Whether they're a designer, whether they're an engineer, whether they're, an HR consultant, like any role that's been done on a flexible basis, you want to pay for their expertise, not for their time to struggle to figure out a system for themselves to work within.
Yeah, what's interesting too is I had a specific situation actually very recently happen where I was let go from a freelance team, specifically because of this kind of death spiral type of thing, where what was happening is there wasn't really clear briefs or clear guardrails, both with the client and on the internal side. And so I think there was at some point a conversation that happened around pricing. And because there wasn't really a true PM role involved, I had pretty frequently brought up the fact that, you're paying me X amount of money to do this thing where I'm really having to do both roles, and my hours are being inflated because of it. So it's not only hurting the client because it's taking longer, but you're actually dipping more into your potential profits from the agency side because you're having to pay me more to ask more questions to really get answers. And I think what happened was eventually the choice was made to just get someone in there that was more of a yes person to handle it.
You're
And it's
bringing
like,
up those hard questions.
oh man, yeah, it's like and then you just watch it after the fact. You're like, that was the first step of the downward spiral, because if
Yeah.
they can't internally pinpoint what started that, and now they're just chasing cheaper cheaper labor, and then the client's not getting what they want, it's this vicious cycle where you just kind of come down to the
Yeah.
bottom. And the more that you actually were talking about this just a few minutes ago, the more I'm kind of realizing too, I think a lot of the reason why marketing departments and design departments are in such turmoil, or have been for the last few years, is because so many of them just straight up removed those PM roles and
Yeah.
have not come to the full realization yet of what that means for their business.
It's interesting because especially going into the new year and evaluating new opportunities, are there how do you kind of try to see it? How do you try to see under the hood? Like, are there any instances where not having a PM would be a red flag to you?
Yeah, so to be totally honest, it usually isn't now, but that's only because I've kind of been thrown to the wolves and figured out how to deal with it on my own. And that kind of having a PM, at least within the last several years, has been more of the exception and not the rule. So I've kind of figured out how to handle that more on my own, but there are definitely a few instances where I wouldn't touch the project with a 10-foot pole. Um, Specifically what I think we talked about in a different episode, which is web projects being one of them. And that's because they tend to require a lot of very specialized expertise on all ends of the spectrum, with a lot of different roles working together, while also having to communicate a lot of these changes that are happening to a client of what's feasible and timelines and all sorts of stuff. And it can get soured very quickly if you're not, you know, functioning in the best way through all of that. So for me, I think any role that involves more than two different departments should absolutely have a PM, and even more so when it's in a larger org structure. Basically, the more people involved,
That
the
makes
more
sense.
that person is necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
If there's more people that need an intermediary, like that becomes a more and more critical role.
Which is funny too, because I think I had seen a little graphic at one point about like the compounding effect of what happens when you hire a new person. And it was like, when you have two people, there's only one line between the two of them. When you have three, it becomes
Right.
1-to-1, 1-to-1. And then, yeah, the
Yes.
amount of different interactions that you can have compounds. And so by the time you have 20 people, you're thinking, oh, there's only 20 ways to interact, but really it's
Yeah.
like to the power of 10 or whatever. And that's where things get really wild. And I think it's hard
Yeah.
for our brains sometimes to think about all of these different ways that interactions can happen with just one extra added person.
And I think that that's a good point, even to think about from kind of that department leader perspective, where if you don't have a PM and you are now having to manage discussions and relationships between your CEO or whoever your boss is, your department partners, like, if you're in marketing and sales, or, product and marketing, everything needs to be coordinated, but also the logistics factor. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
be in between your full team, HR, legal, finance, and again, it's basically, it's a case where like the shit rolls uphill.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, you're spending half your time being that go between, handling logistics, when that is absolutely not the best use of, C or D director level time.
Yep.
So I read a book last year called Free Time by Jenny Blake. It's a pretty straightforward read. It's not like real academic, but the crux of her message is that free time isn't really free. It's like the most valuable resource that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And with every hour that you're able to free up during your week, you can be doing something that you love, or something that is, you're pursuing a new area of growth. And she argues like the singular key to unlocking more free time is to systematically automate repetitive tasks.
Yep.
And I don't think that's theory is rocket science, but it's funny when you really zoom out and look at all of our jobs involve some amount of repetition. Like, it could be little things like scheduling meetings, or big things like scoping projects, but the more often we do a task, kind of the less you notice about how much time it's taking, and the more we just like absorb it to be part of our professional days. Like, this is my job. But if you step back and say, wow, I'm spending 45 minutes a day just booking meetings, it's a real eye opener. I had this the other day. I caught myself and I was like, I should absolutely be spending $10 a month on Calendly.
Yep.
Like, that adds up. 45 minutes a day booking meetings just for myself. I'm not anybody else's secretary, but just for myself. What else? That adds up to 15 hours a month. Like, I could be training for a half marathon with that time.
Or even if you put a dollar value on it to your business too. I mean,
Absolutely.
that can also be a different way of looking at it.
Definitely. And so it's a really interesting thing to think about, just how, you know, from a project management perspective, if that shit is rolling uphill, how do you take a real hard look at what tasks you're spending time on and what tasks you're spending on over and over again, and how can you start to see some of that benefit both for yourself as a, you know, as a department leader, and certainly what benefits does that extend to your team, to be, you know, a key role, and create some of that experience that links the freelance experience to your to embed with your company in a different way.
Yeah. I had also read a book that sounds kind of similar. It was called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And there's an interesting little tidbit in there that he talked about, which I think was called like the $50 magic pill. And it was basically like any employee in the entire company has at any given point $50. And I could be making up that number, but it's something like that. $50 to throw toward a problem. And it's basically like, before you go to your manager to take their time away from what they're doing, you have the ability to drop $50 on a solution to try and work through the problem. And I thought that was so super interesting, because it goes back to like your time being such a valuable thing. And it's like,
Yes.
if you can throw even a little bit of money at it and potentially just alleviate the bottleneck immediately without pulling someone out of what they're doing, it's a win-win for everybody. And I thought that was a super interesting concept of like, you know, if you really need to, pull the trigger and just get rid of the problem right now.
Absolutely. And how aware that is to say, even to solve your own time problems, that you've got to go to somebody else to ask for permission, or to ask for budget, or to ask for, hey, I'm spending too much time doing X, what should I do? It's like, people that solve their own problems are the best type of employees. Like, how do you be a good employee?
Yep.
I think that there's so many options out there. That threshold. I mean, there's so many automation tools in the world, like obviously my own company included, but you know, that are designed to help PMs level up, really by freeing up their own time to be more strategic. And also for the mid-range PMs who want to just stay really good at checking off lists, like, I think that's a little bit of a threat. You know, I think that a lot of this comes down to that, like, what is it, like the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your results will come from 20% of your effort. So whether you're a PM or whether you're a department leader that's like had this roll up where you no longer have middle management support and you're dealing with all of this yourself, you've got to look at where are your highest value tasks, where is your highest, you know, value time being spent, and figure out how to automate the rest of that 80%. You know, it's going to be the repetitive stuff, to give yourself the headspace to contribute more meaningfully to the business. It's such an interesting, it is obvious, but it's a big reminder, thinking about that PM role specifically, about how critical they can be to a team, and also how much of that role is taking off, you know, those repetitive tasks from senior leadership in the first place.
Yeah. And I think, to bring it back to the AI convo for a sec, I think knowing where to strategically put your energy, where to automate, where to do more creative tasks is going to become more of kind of the in-demand skill set as we move forward into the future, which is, you know, more high-level creative thinking is really going to be the stuff that, you know, separates you from someone that's just doing something executional.
As with everything, it's evolve or die. And I think that that's totally spot on.
Yep. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I think this is a little bit of a long one today, but really interesting chat. Maybe we'll do a part 2.
Yes, I think that would be great. As with most of these, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you
All
found
right.
this useful or not, Follow us here or over on LinkedIn for more tips on how you can get the most of working with and as freelance talent.
See you next time.
Bye.